So good afternoon, everybody. You're all very welcome. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Norley Kennedy, the Vice President for Research at the University of Limerick. So I'm delighted to welcome you all here to this fantastic event this afternoon. And this, as you know, is a combined in-person and online event. And we're joined by colleagues from a range of sectors across the higher education sector, government and agencies involved in funding. And this is all part of ongoing discussions around the new Research Innovation Bill 2023. So just to note, for those of you joining us online, we have closed captioning available today, and you can alter the size of those captions by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So the format of this afternoon's event, as you know, is a keynote speech, and then we'll follow with a panel discussion, and we'll welcome questions from the audience and online as part of that panel discussion. So I just want to say at the outset very briefly, because we're keen to crack on with the main event, this really is a very important time for research in Ireland, and the formation of this new research agency offers, I suppose, a really interesting and wonderful opportunity for research innovation in Ireland. And this event today, organised by the Irish University Association, allows for an extension of that discussion, and it's very timely given the ongoing discussions and what's happening at the moment. So looking forward to an exciting session, and we have a very strong panel here today. So on that note, I want to introduce our keynote speaker to you. I'm delighted to introduce to you Mari Sundli Tveit, who is the Chief Executive of the Research Council of Norway. Now, Mari has extensive leadership experience and expertise in research and research policy. Her previous position was as Policy Director at the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise, and that has given her substantial insight into the research and innovation needs of business and industry. Mari has been the Rector of the Norwegian University of Life Sciences and President of Universities Norway. She studied nature management at the universities of Tromsø, Bergen, and the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, from where she also holds a PhD, and became a full professor of landscape architecture in 2013. Mari has held a number of positions in the R&D sector, including on the boards of the European University Association and of Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg. And she's a member of the governing board of Science Europe and the Global Research Council. So I think you'll agree we're very privileged to have Mari with us today to share her experiences of the Norwegian Research Agency. So Mari, with that, I'll introduce you to come forward, and then we'll move into our panel session after your keynote. Thank you very much, Mari.
Thank you, Norley, for that very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's so great to see representatives from governmental departments, funding agencies, research performers, research community, the whole spectrum. We're here to discuss very important questions. So thank you so much for this invitation to speak about the role of national research funding agencies. I think it's a very exciting time for Ireland, on the cusp of creating a new Irish research funding agency. So this question of how to design an effective funding structure for research and development, that's interested me in different capacities throughout my career. I've seen and experienced the strengths and weaknesses of different funding schemes from the university sector as a researcher myself, as a rector, and later as the policy director of the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprise. And I'm also seeing it now from different perspectives in Science Europe, as previously also in the European University Association, and also on the Global Research Council. This question is constantly being discussed, and I think we're all trying to find the very right way to do it. And obviously now, in my role as Chief Executive of the Research Council of Norway, this is what I strive to do every day, to develop that system the best that it can be. Now, the Norwegian Research Council was merged into one comprehensive research council agency in 1993. So that's actually 30 years ago, almost on this day. I think it's also, several countries are currently discussing this. I think one way or the other, we're all discussing it all the time, but there are very sort of concrete discussions going on that are going to lead to change. And So those discussions that were very parallel to the ones preceding the establishment of the Research Council of Norway, I think we're seeing today. And after 3 decades, the Norwegian Minister of Education and Research in Norway is now, he's just started a review of the Research Council as part of a review of the larger system in Norway. We were just on the brink, we were just starting doing that. So we're going through the whole research ecosystem, including the funding. And since we've just started the discussions or starting the work on this, it's actually going to be a white paper. So we weren't expecting conclusions coming from the minister at this point. But I'll tell you that last week he came on stage and he gave a very decisive response to one of the most critical questions. And I'm going to leave that as a cliffhanger for now. I'll come back to it later. Right, okay, so before revealing that response, I am going to provide some context for why that comprehensive single research council was established in 1993. I'll try to explain what I believe to be the fundamental roles of a research funding agency today, and I'll go through the experiences that we have having this comprehensive research council and also the feedback that we get on how we have been able and are able to fulfill our role, because as you know, you get feedback. So I'll tell you about that. Now, prior to the creation of the Research Council of Norway, there were 5 separate research funding agencies in Norway, and these organizations were responsible for funding research in specific fields, such as technology, social sciences and humanities, agriculture and life sciences. There were 5 of them. And so they've got funding roles as well as advisory roles within their fields. And the creation of the Research Council of Norway brought together these various research funding agencies and consolidated them into one organization with the mandate to fund research across all disciplines and all fields. The goal was to create one strong, comprehensive research council that could strengthen the quality of research, that could increase cross-sectoral cooperation and its interdisciplinary approaches, obviously also reduce transactional costs. This is something that they always want to be more efficient. Increasing efficiency was one also of the goals. So we're a funding agency, but we also, and this is by law, we're an independent advisor to the government on research policy and on policy for research. In addition, we're also responsible for communication about science, about research, about innovation with all sectors on research and development issues, including supporting and monitoring the task of or looking into the public trust in research, in science, in groundbreaking research. We're monitoring all these things all the time. With the grand challenges facing us today, and all of them are wicked problems requiring interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary efforts, I think the arguments for adopting a model with one comprehensive funding agency, they seem to only have strengthened since 1993. National research funders should be able to support interdisciplinary research, also the radical interdisciplinarity, the research that's apt to address key challenges facing society, such as climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, and so on and so on, at the same time as securing a strong foundation for the groundbreaking, curiosity-driven research. And this has to come as a whole. This combination is also key when you want to adopt mission-based approaches when you aim to achieve specific research-based goals or addressing specific societal problems, setting a goal and a time frame for it, you still have to keep that totality. You still need both the groundbreaking and you need the full range of different disciplines and dimensions, basic or applied, to be able to do that. You cannot put everything into one. So in today's world, enhancing international cooperation in research and development has become increasingly vital, and certainly so for a very small country like Norway, maybe also Ireland. So for us to help national research teams secure funding through international research and innovation programs such as Horizon Europe, that's become an increasingly important task for organizations like us. So all these things we try to do at the same time. And I'm going to try to sum it up a little bit before moving on. I think a modern, well-functioning research agency or research funding agency, apologies, should, in my opinion, be able to fill at least the following roles. We should be able to coordinate and allocate research funding as efficiently as possible. We should increase the quality of research from basic to applied research and innovation, the full range. We should strengthen collaboration between different disciplines, regions, and sectors. We should help accelerate the process of bringing research results into use. We should take an active role in enabling societal change and sustainability. We should boost international collaboration and secure funding from international research programs. And we should communicate effectively and coherently to enhance knowledge of significant issues across all societal sectors and build trust in science. The ability of a research funding organization to fulfill these roles, it depends on various factors, such as the number of national funding agencies in a country, their interrelationship, the structure and design of these agencies. It matters. The Research Council of Norway operates under the authority of the Ministry of Education and Research. As such, the Research Council is not part of any particular ministry, but it's rather a separate entity that works closely with various governmental bodies, including 15 ministries. And we also get the funding that we channel through projects from 15 different ministries. So they all provide the funding for research, and they provide that with their prioritization in the yearly letters that we get. And they have priorities that align with their respective areas of responsibility and policy priorities. And you might think, with funding from so many ministries, that sounds like a challenge for coordinating it, which is a very important role for us. And of course, it's extremely important that the activities, that prioritizations, I don't, my tongue is, that it's closely coordinated, and that there is a common, across ministries, across sectors, a common strategy for national research funding. And we have that, luckily. In Norway, the Ministry of Education and Research is responsible for developing a central strategy document. It's a long-term plan, it's a 10-year plan, the government's long-term plan for research and higher education, which is approved by the parliament. And all the ministries support and also have a responsibility to adopt this plan and use it to achieve their respective objectives. But it's the Ministry of Education and Research that take on the role of coordinating these efforts. So they have that role, we also have that role. And we do that very closely together. As an independent advisor, The Research Council is also heavily involved in developing the government's long-term plan. So we are in both ends, sort of. The Research Council is also responsible. So we're responsible for giving the advice for the plan to be the right plan. And then afterwards, we're responsible for implementing it. And we're also responsible for developing the necessary instruments, the necessary mechanisms, so that the plan's objectives can be achieved. The Research Council covers the whole spectrum, as I said before, from basic research to innovation and even within business, the business sector, and also the public sector. We are responsible for the technology transfer office function, which is a critical component of the innovation ecosystem, particularly in academia and research institutions. We also manage something called SkatteFUNN, which is a tax refund mechanism for all businesses in Norway that are engaged in research and development activities. And in fact, more than 50% of our funding goes to projects where businesses are involved. We also have an agency in Norway called Innovation Norway that we work very closely with. While we fund research and innovation and research-based innovation also in the business sector, Innovation Norway provides a range of services to support and help companies with market analysis, strategy development, funding, establishment, and internationalization export. So we work also very closely together. But everything that has research in front of it, then it's us. One of the Research Council's key responsibilities is to allocate research funding in a way that supports the national research strategy and the priorities set out in the long-term plan. We do collaborate very closely with other government agencies, universities, research institutes, the industry partners, so that we promote research and innovation in Norway. We also conduct evaluations of the status and strength of different research disciplines, and make recommendations to the government on how to improve the effectiveness and impact of research efforts in Norway. A little bit about our governance structure. We are governed by a board of directors that's appointed by the Norwegian government. The board is responsible for setting the council's overall strategy. That is our mirroring and our translation of the long-term plan. It's responsible to ensure that our activities align with the long-term plan, and the day-to-day operations of the council, those are managed by the administration led by me and my executive management team. Together, we're responsible for implementing our strategies and for managing our various programs and activities. We also have a range of portfolio boards that will cover all the different fields, and so that we make sure that the totality of our responsibilities are also reflected in the governing structure. As mentioned, ongoing discussions regarding the roles and design of research funding agencies are taking place in many countries, including Ireland. And our agency has been evaluated by our own international advisory board, as well as by the OECD. And also recently, our friends in our neighboring country, Sweden, and they have a system which is quite different from us with many research funding agencies. And they are now evaluating their system to see if they need to make changes, or if in fact they're planning to make changes. And in this process, they've also assessed the Norwegian model. And we were very keen to hear how they were looking at it and how they saw the strengths and weaknesses of the Norwegian model. They looked at the effectiveness of our structure. They particularly looked into that we have one single research funding agency. And they looked at, I guess, that whole list of things that I think that you should fulfill to be a modern research funding agency. And we had some feedback from them. And I can tell you that they want to go in the direction of having fewer. Whether or not they will be able to go all the way to having one I will leave that to them to find out, but I think the feedback that they had specifically on how or the efficiency of having one agency when you're trying to solve very complex and broad societal problems, drawing on all the different kinds and dimensions of research, that is a very good thing. So I'm going to go into some strengths and some pitfalls now, and I'm going to draw on these evaluations as well as our government's own ongoing work and the experience that with the model that we've also ourselves accumulated over 30 years. And so the consolidation of several funding agencies into one research council aimed to streamline the research funding and to minimize the duplication of efforts and administrative expenses. That was one part of it. I think it's quite challenging to quantify, but I think it's also very clear that we have succeeded in that regard, reducing the transactional costs. But even more importantly than increased efficiency is how the consolidation of research funding agencies into one agency has allowed for substantially improved strategic planning and coordination of research activities. And this is one point, as I said, that was stressed very heavily by the Swedish evaluators that found that to be a very good way, and particularly having a long-term plan, which is owned by the parliament and the government, and then to have one agency to follow it up, that they found to be very a good setup. As mentioned, we have a central role in developing the primary policy document for Norwegian for research and education efforts. I think, and that was what the Swedes said as well, that having a research council, one research council that can both take an active part in developing that strategy, the national strategy for how to move about with this, recognizing that solving these challenges that depends on research, innovation and education. And how do we do that? And that's a joint effort. We need to pull the system together and work together to be able to succeed. And interdisciplinary research is one very key part of that, and also transdisciplinary efforts. It allows researchers from different fields to collaborate, bring their unique expertise to bear one particular challenge, leading to more comprehensive, more effective solutions. You cannot solve wicked problems working within one discipline, within one department, within one sector, or within one country or a region. You have to work together. And as the complexity of the challenges that face us increases, interdisciplinary research becomes more and more essential. And I think for that, it's good to bring all the fields together. It's crucial to emphasize, however, when I say interdisciplinarity many times, it's very important to stress that interdisciplinarity can only exist with the vital presence of and focus on individual disciplines. So it's not one or the other. To be truly transdisciplinary, one must first secure the conditions, growth and development of separate disciplines. Then you can have all the mechanisms bringing it together. So we always have to do both. I guess one potential pitfall that people would be worried about in any system, I guess, but maybe bringing it into just one single funding agency would be the risk of insufficient attention to the full range of individual disciplines, that there would be a fear of becoming invisible, not having focus. And I think that worry, I need to be always worried about that, because I have to make sure that all the different individual disciplines have the right conditions so that they can also later work together. And I think that a comprehensive funding agency is somehow better equipped to develop instruments and mechanisms that facilitate the collaboration between different disciplines, which is so necessary to solve the grand challenges. So you can have, if you do things right, you can have it very, you can manage to do it both ways. And I think that balance between all the different things, all the different dimensions, I think it's very common that the worries come up when you start discussing systems and structure. But it's that worry is, and that challenge is always alive, no matter how many agencies you have, you'll still have that. So I think, and that's one thing that you should never fool yourself into thinking that just because you bring things into within one set of walls, things are going to work by itself. Organization is only organization. You have to work with all of the whole content. You have to work with the culture, which I'll come back to a little bit. But it's a difficult balance to secure, for sure. Striking the right balance between basic and applied research and building bridges between and accelerating the process of bringing research results into use. We would argue that from extensive experience that this totality of responsibilities can be effectively secured by a comprehensive agency. Doesn't mean that I don't get feedback. Are you forgetting us? Are you forgetting us? Are you forgetting? That's part of actually keeping that balance right. So I need to get that constant feedback. Doesn't mean that we're doing it wrong. It just means that we have a good dialogue that secures the totality of the system. We also believe that our mandate makes it easier for us to address complex challenges and crises that require a cross-sectoral approach. I think I've said that many times now, so you probably got the point. One thing that's very important, and I think we've experienced it over the last couple of years, maybe more than any time before, during COVID, for example, the need to have the ability and the agility to respond very quickly to an urgent crisis, even more urgent than the climate crisis is urgent, but the very sudden, maybe it's the right word, a sudden crisis. In responding to challenges such as the COVID pandemic, for example, but also the twin transition, which is a slower process, it's essential that agencies can be flexible, that we can be agile, and that we avoid path dependency and blind spots. This goes for any organization, but when you put everything into one, you have to be even more attentive to it. You really have to make sure that you always discover the blind spots, that you always think about, could we do things in a different way? Do we have the right agility? Are we just following the paths that we're on? Or do we keep questioning ourselves or asking ourselves, are there other ways of doing it? Is there something that I don't see? Is there something that I don't do? I don't want to come to 2030 and we're going to see how did it go with the sustainable development goals, and then look back and think, oh, so in 2023 I was in the Research Council. Why didn't I do that? I want to think about that now. So having that constant dialogue with the different sectors is extremely important. And I guess with a very large organization, it can be more difficult to be agile and to have that flexibility, but it's possible. And I think whether or not you succeed with that, coming back now to what I said before, is much more about culture than it is structure itself. So that's something that we work with also constantly. And obviously, having one organization like we have, it's also, we also have the ability maybe more easily to do holistic quick movements, which I think we were able to do, for example, in the phase of COVID. And coming back to the coordinating role, that we help coordinate the appropriate response with relevant ministries, sectors, and disciplines. I think we saw that during COVID, that worked well. That was a stress test of our system and set up during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were able to, in a very short time, change priorities, not all the priorities, but sufficient part of it to have the responses that were necessary for the national work with all the things that we had to do and all the research needs related to COVID-19. So we put, for example, we very quickly put money out there for different research purposes, including vaccines, treatments, epidemiological questions, many different things. A very fundamental part of succeeding in reaching the SDGs is to ensure that research is brought into use. And to facilitate the spread and use of research results, we have a battery of different mechanisms aiming towards everything from basic science to applied research in all different fields. We also continually consider new mechanisms and how we can refine the existing ones so that we can accelerate this transition and to make sure that there are no stages with funding gaps. At the same time, we keep building that broad knowledge base, securing the preparedness for all the unknown crises that will come, because they will come. And also all those, let's say, serendipity-based solutions, the solutions that you cannot plan for and you cannot vote for them or anything. You can just, you can make spaces for that kind of process. And you can also, the ability to detect and accelerate is very important. We believe that the setup that we have has been working quite well in this regard, but I don't think that's necessarily due to the structure. I'm just saying that the structure has not been a hindrance for us to do it. And I think that being able to accelerate sort of throughout the system is easier when you have one. Science, as you all know, research, its very nature is international. And all the grand challenges, they need to be solved internationally. Global crises, we have to solve them globally. And I think that international research cooperation has never been as crucial as it is today. So it's very important for us and for any funding agency that we are able to align the regional, national, and international research funding systems so that they mirror enough, but also complement each other. For Norway and Norwegian research, the Norwegian research community, it's absolutely crucial that we're part of the European system and that we're, you know, that we're not in the EU. I'm not going to say more about that. That might have been a very good idea, but anyway, we're in the Horizon Europe, and that is absolutely crucial. And not only for the Norwegian research community to be able to be out there and compete and cooperate with the frontier of science, but also for Norwegian businesses. There's no way that Norwegian businesses can take part of the European market, compete for market shares, have the necessary partnerships to grow our export in new areas. You know that we're very heavily oil and gas dependent. We need to diversify the economy. And there's no way to do that without going through Horizon Europe and succeed there first. So that's something that we put great effort into. And so we work very hard on that part of the system, making sure that it aligns. And there also we work very closely with Innovation Norway. It's my belief that no matter how important we think it is in the Research Council, our success in Horizon Europe wouldn't have been possible without a government that has a clear strategy in place for this initiative, and that has given us as an agency a very clear role in working to implement it. So that's also part of the long-term plan. I'm going to mention one last advantage of a single funding agency. You know by now that I'm all for it. And this is also one that the Swedish evaluators emphasized. And in their opinion, it will be much more difficult to communicate clearly on research issues in a system with many different and competing funding agencies. And clarity of communication is, of course, extremely important to build trust in all sectors of society as well as with the general public. This is not instead, obviously, of the research communication being done by the community and the researchers itself. But this is part of building the trust that we need to succeed in solving the grand challenges. And we also, as Research Council, we have lots of we have programs directed at young people, schooling materials, all kinds of meeting places for all kinds of addressing the public in different ways. So this is that part of it that's our responsibility. And it's also, if you have very many funding agencies, it must not, but it can quickly become difficult to understand the roles and responsibilities of the different agencies. I think the word being used sometimes in Norway would be jungle. There's a jungle. You know, it's very important, very difficult for the users, for the researchers to know, you know, where the calls are, who have different, who's responsible for what, where should I turn, you know. So working with this, I think it's helped to have one agency working with all the different fields of research. But we still have a little bit of the jungle with all the other parts of it, because there's more than that. So probably you're thinking now, also she's mentioning all these great things about having one agency, and maybe there must be some pitfalls as well. And I've mentioned many things that we need to think about constantly. And there's also another dimension that I think people will come back to whenever there's a structural discussion about it, or our changes are ahead. You think about the power, the consolidation of power, because it's also that. And that can be a good thing, and sometimes that could also bring trouble. And as I already said, we work very, very hard in every way to include all disciplines, sectors, and regions in our work. We do, as I also said, we have that reflected in the governance structure and the structure of our boards. We have portfolio boards. And we also keep a very, very open door with all the research communities, whether it's the universities, research institutes, or the businesses, so that we are as transparent as possible, and that we have a lot of dialogue up front when we do changes. Yeah, both formally and informally, we keep that dialogue open at all times. And I keep inviting myself to go. Our experience is that there is a constant, but also very fruitful debate about our mechanisms, about our instruments, about our setup, how we work things. And I think such debates and discussions, they're important for agencies like us. We need them. There shouldn't be peace and quiet. There should always be, we should always be exposed to those tensions and to those worries. Because striking that right balance between all the different dimensions that we need to care about, that is not a one-time job. That is something that moves all the time, and you have to work it again and again, always. So, as you understand, the feedback that we've received, as well as our own experience, support the consolidation of several funding agencies into one. And I'm going to come back to the cliffhanger. You've probably forgotten it now, right? It's going to take a long time. So, as I mentioned, our minister, he commented on this last week, and it was quite unexpected, considering that we're just starting the system review, which is going to be a white paper. So it's a parliament decision at the end of the day. But he said very clearly that, and it was a statement, he said it, I am not discussing this. I'm not interested in facilitating a discussion on whether or not we're going to have one research funding agency. He said that model will prevail. So I think it's a good thing. I mean, I think it's something that should be constantly discussed. But I think that it goes to show that we have a very good experiences with it. It's worked well for us, and I think that with your agenda of 2030, the things that in Ireland that you want to do, having this discussion over how this system, the structure should be, moving towards having one agency, I think it's a very, very important discussion. I think I've had such interesting discussions over the last hours here in Dublin. I think you seem to be asking all the right questions, and I think that you'll be able to answer very many of them with the new setup. I think also even if when you've landed the structure, it's crucial that you start working straight away with the organizational structure, with the culture that fosters cross-disciplinary cooperation within the agency. You can consolidate and make one organization all you want, but it's so easy that that silos re-emerge between the disciplines, between the sectors within the new organization, and that can hinder the effects that you're looking for. So it's very important to start working with that and start thinking, you're probably already thinking about it, and creating that culture. It takes time. It takes time because it involves bringing different cultures together, taking the best from all of them. And we've worked long and hard on this, and I think it's a constant work, and promoting the cooperation within the organizations, finding ways of organizing it to make sure that we are sort of cross-disciplinarily or also within the organization, or cross-organization is probably maybe the right word for it. So in fact, well, I was with the research agency for 2 years now, and so we actually did a new restructuring earlier this year to take that one step further. And with that being said, I'm very confident that the establishment of Irish Research and Innovation Agency will enhance the possibilities for Irish research and innovation. And we are eagerly anticipating to see this agency come into life. And we are more than willing to offer any assistance that we can offer for all the pitfalls that with the culture and working in the organization and all of that. So we're at your disposal for that, and we are just wishing you the very best of luck in this crucial endeavor, and we look forward to seeing you succeed.
Thanks very much, Mari. I'll ask you to take a seat here, and I'll invite up our other panel members to join us. So I'm delighted. I'll let them seat themselves first, and then we will. I'll introduce them. It's great. Thanks very much, Mari. I'll pop you here beside me. So I'm delighted to be joined here today by Professor Jim Livesey, who's the Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Galway, Maeve Corcoran, who joins us today as the Managing Director at Accenture Labs, and also then by Kevin Burke, the National Director for Horizon Europe at Enterprise Ireland. And before I come to our panel members, I just suppose want to reflect a little bit on that wonderful presentation from Mari. I mean, so much struck me throughout that. I think we've had wonderful learnings and reflections, but I was probably most struck in listening to you in the maturity of approach that you take as an agency in being in reflecting and being reflexive, and also working so hard to embed culture not only within your organization but across the entire ecosystem. So I think for me there's significant learnings for us as a research system across all the actors that are involved, that we don't forget that it sounds like a very significant part of the magic sauce that makes this actually be successful. Am I making a fair interpretation, Mari, do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Very, very useful. So I suppose what I'd like to start with as our panel members is, having listened to Mari, but also having your own views, what do you think, and I'll go to each of you and I'll start with you, Jim, what are your hopes, I suppose, or expectations for our new agency? And I suppose if you're looking back in 10 years' time, what do you want from your perspective, Jim?
Thanks, Norley, and thanks for the talk. It was really inspiring, and my own thoughts follow on very much from some of what Mari was saying. So I suppose my hopes are two, and there's lots and lots of other things, but two big things. First of all is that the agency, which I think will be a wonderful contribution, will simplify our aspirations. We get ourselves caught in the weeds of basic versus applied. The goal is to be one of the best places in the world to do research and to contribute to the society and the maturation of the society in the manner that we know we have to. A single agency posing that radical question will drive us forward and create the space for that culture of excellence, which I thought Mari was describing really beautifully. And then, and the other thing I think that I hope for, and this is me now speaking as a historian and social scientist, is that it will mark the end of a certain period of sort of trauma and depression and negativity. And you all know what I'm talking about. So that we will conduct our business on the front foot, that we will have confidence that the best work will be funded, and that we have the structures that are capable of finding the best work. And I don't think, when you listen to some of the conversations, we don't share that confidence now. Whether it's true or not, that's a whole other story, right? But we don't have that confidence. So I'd love this, the foundation of this agency, to be the end of that 2008 to now period, and mark a real new beginning of confidence.
It's really interesting, Jim, and I suppose there's something for me in listening to you, thinking about principles that would be at the core of this new agency that speak to that element of trust and excellence, and all of us, I suppose, buying into or signing up to those principles of trust, and trusting the system to do that for us, to ensure what you describe would be to the fore. So thank you for that, Jim. Maeve, might move to you next then.
Okay, thanks very much. So I do my team in Accenture, it's an R&D, it's sort of a corporate R&D team, and we do a lot of work with universities and in academic collaborations. And I guess what I'm really looking forward to is actually those collaborations, including a full interdisciplinary team across the disciplines as referred to there. It's interesting, even within my team, which was all computer scientists, I'm now starting to hire scientists like biologists, chemists, because of the type of work we're doing. It's not just bring them in for, a consultation. We need them to be part of the team. So as you've referred to, those wicked problems need those interdisciplinary teams. And just one thing that you mentioned that really struck me, the whole thing about it shouldn't be quiet. There shouldn't be, you should always be, keeping things just in balance. There's a tipping point. You just have to be, like, we're a global innovation center in Accenture, and we're the exact same. Since we've been founded, whatever, 7 years ago, we're always, keep it like having to stay ahead. And if things are quiet and it's like, oh, everything's settled, there's something wrong. Yeah. So it's really interesting you say that. So
yeah, that's really interesting. And I think also I was struck, Mari, and something I also very strongly believe in, the strength of the core disciplines to allow the interdisciplinary work is really crucial, and we can't lose sight of that. And that's echoed as well by what Maeve said from her perspective in industry. While you bring in the different disciplines to work in an interdisciplinary way, that's built on a foundation of strong discipline. So thanks, Maeve. Kevin, your hopes and expectations for the new agency?
Well, I want to say thanks, first of all. It was a fascinating discussion, and I took a lot of mental notes along the way. And I might come back to Innovation Norway and the Research Council of Norway as well, because there's interesting parallels there, I think, between Norway and Ireland. In terms of the question, I mean, I'm hoping that the new agency will take the best of what the Irish Research Council and Science Foundation Ireland have already been doing, and the way they've already been adapting and moving to address, what we call, the grand challenges, those pernicious problems that we're now seeing, need to solve at an environmental, societal, and economic level. So the ask of the research and innovation system is getting bigger. We're asking more of the system, and we're asking it to adapt and address more more complex problems. And I'm hoping that the new agency will be very well positioned to, integrate, between STEM and, arts, humanities, social sciences, that we'll see a better integration between them, because we know from working in Horizon Europe that the projects that have that true interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, that those are just better projects. They're better projects in terms of understanding the problem to be solved, how they go about solving the problem and checking that they're solving the problem. And also they're thinking about the societal impacts as well as the economic ones in terms of adoption and other things. So I'm hoping that this new agency will be very well positioned in terms of Horizon Europe, that they will be bringing that kind of cross-disciplinarity to bear on new project kind of consortia coming out of Ireland, and hopefully collaborating with similar consortia from Norway in various projects. So I'm hoping that the new agency will bring additional internationalization benefits to us in terms of Horizon Europe.
Very, very valuable, Kevin. And absolutely what you were saying, Mari, the ability of the agency to enable that international collaboration is a core function as well. We won't listen to us all, Mari, and before I go to the panel, to questions from online and from in the room here today, that collaboration piece and harnessing, because for us it won't be like your own system, we will still have other funders in the system. How do you think, what learning should we take from yourselves, albeit doing it in a slightly different way across it? What should we take from you as learnings about how we optimize that collaboration, that discussion, that prioritization with different funders and different actors in the system?
Well, I think coming back to the wicked problems and the fact that you have to work cross-sectorally and probably even more widely, so that then within the agency, then you have to work with other agencies, and you have to find the best ways of making that a sort of seamless cooperation, and knowing about each other's strategies, having it aligned, thinking about it as a bigger system. So for me, I think it would be a worst case situation if I started thinking that, for example, Innovation Norway would be my competitor. No, we are not here to be our single units. We are here to be one coherent system. So we have to constantly, and it's very, very easy to start thinking about, oh, but I want to get everything into my organization. I want to have all the responsibilities and whatnot. But I think it's much more important that we try to think a little bit larger than ourselves and think about what we jointly want to achieve. And it's very easily said. It's much more difficult to actually do it. And I think from the political point of view, it's important to make sure that cooperation or efficient cooperation is actually possible, so that we don't have like even legislative hindrances can exist for that in the system. So there are so many levels that you need to work on, but it's possible to have you can have joint calls between different agencies. We do that with Innovation Norway, for example. During the COVID crisis, 100 million euros was suddenly put on the table by the minister saying, we want you to quickly build a mechanism so that we can build back better, to use that phrase, and so that you can take fresh new ideas from groundbreaking research from applied wherever to put it into the market, the whole thing. So that was given to us and Innovation Norway jointly, and we had to work together to find the best ways of doing that. So it's possible.
It is, and we saw that similarly in COVID with the IRC, HRB, SFI working very well together, and cooperation across systems. So thank you. Do you want to pick up your point on innovation?
Norway
there, please.
Yeah. So, well, going back a little bit, I think each part of the national research and innovation system needs to play its own part, be funded and judged and KPI'd on its own merits. And then we need to look at how we create the instruments and pathways to create, synergies between those different parts of the system in a way that will make sense to the career path of research scientists, to the needs of industry, to society needs. So I think there's a lot of agencies in Ireland, it has to be said. We can't deny that, but it's a very intensively connected ecosystem here. I get a glimpse into that in the Horizon Europe team, because that national support team combines, 10, 11 different agencies and government departments. So I get to witness the intensity of the interactions firsthand. But I think we need maybe to innovate still more in terms of how we create instruments and pathways between the different parts of what we're doing. And rather than trying to get a full back to play, at center forward, we need to create ways for those to connect better together, so that we raise all boats. And obviously Enterprise Ireland, we would have a focus on how we harness talent and technology within the third level system to the benefit of, the competitiveness of Irish industry, and as a mechanism of improving the innovation performance of Irish companies so that they can compete in global markets. So that's our kind of agenda around the third level system in terms of applied research and talent transfer as well, transfer of people. But we recognize that it's all about complementarity. And so it's really about how we as Enterprise Ireland, as an innovation agency, will complement and assist and hopefully work very well with the new agency. And I think Horizon Europe will actually be one really interesting arena where that will be playing out. And I'm hoping that this will increase the level of connectivity between Enterprise Ireland as an innovation agency and the new agency. I think it will create a whole new bunch of opportunities for us to do more collectively.
Great. Thanks very much, Kevin. I'm going to take a question from online of Turlock Downs, who's asking about the makeup of the board of the Research Council. And I presume you're meaning we'll take a Norway perspective and what the relationship is between the sectoral boards and the main board. And I suppose how much power do the sectoral boards have within the overall board? Mari, you can give us a sense of that.
Yeah. So the overarching board of the council is like any overarching board. They have the responsibility for the totality and to overseeing that we follow up on the strategy, the economy, all of the financial instruments, and they have the responsibility to report back that totality to the different ministries. But so the portfolio boards, which are the second level boards, we currently have 16 of them, and we're looking at reducing that probably to 11. But so that they have, so there's, for example, one board that is responsible for all the open arenas. They're not thematically framed, it's only curiosity-driven excellence arenas for all disciplines. And they also have the responsibility for the development of disciplines and to leverage that. all disciplines, social sciences, humanities, technology, maths, all the STEMs and the life sciences. And so they have that full range of overseeing that and making sure that the conditions are there for that development. Then you have different thematic themes, or thematic portfolio boards, sorry. They have, each of them have a pot of money that they allocate to projects, and they do the actual funding decisions. But they also, I mean, these are not mutually exclusive thematic fields, that's impossible. So they're also, in addition to overseeing their pot or channeling money from that, they have a strategic responsibility to oversee every grant that's given, in looking at how the totality of what their strategic responsibility looks like throughout our system, and also what's going on in Europe, so that it all aligns. So that's how we've put up these boards, and the overarching board is obviously responsible for the overarching strategy. Then we have portfolio plans, which would be the translation then into the responsibility of a single portfolio board. And so all the 16 plans are then brought back to the overarching board, so they can see that, okay, so the totality of this is the right translation of the overarching strategy. And then coming from that again, they have investment plans that they use to make all the decisions on the different mechanisms that they want to apply when they allocate the money into different pots, going to how much goes to this or how much goes to that. And it's important to say that, for example, basic research is, we have grants going to be basic research throughout. And you can also have applied research in the open arenas. It's just not framed up front. And I think it's fair to say that, I mean, going back to my own time as a researcher, I don't think researchers go around thinking about, okay, so I'm doing basic research and someone else is doing applied researchers. That's a very sort of funders logic. But we need to make sure that we have the full range. So that's a little bit about how the responsibilities of the board, and it's the Research Council board that appoints the members of the different portfolio boards. And we have very open and transparent processes for that. We've set aside the whole autumn because we're revising it now, so there are new members coming in, and we will have dialogue with all the different research or parts of the research community, and people can also nominate. Yeah, and we have to make sure that it's geographically balanced and gender balanced and thematically balanced disciplines and all the rest of it. So it's quite a big puzzle, but it's also an important part of legitimacy of the structure. I think that we do that right.
No, you're absolutely right. I think that's really important, the legitimacy of it. And that goes back to the earlier piece about trust and all those elements that we picked on earlier. Yeah. I look to the audience, a few hands popping up there now. They've literally got 4 went up at one time. So how am I supposed to, I go who's nearest literally to Lee here, if that's all right, just because pragmatics with the mic.
Helen Roach, VPRI in UCD. I was really interested in the fact that you've got a dual role, the role in terms of advising the government, and then also you're playing the role in terms of distributing funds from different agencies who are going to have different requirements. So could you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of that advisory role and the structure that's there? Because presumably it's a think tank and you referred to blind spots and trying to avoid those blind spots.
Yeah, all the portfolio boards have a part in that, developing that advisory role, looking at the strategic development within their respective responsibility areas of responsibility. We also have the way that the organization of the council is set up. It's also we've made sure to have strong competence within various core areas that we need to understand, and we need to have people in the. So I've got lots of previous researchers among my staff, so people that understand, really thoroughly understand the disciplines, and that would be able to follow the development of the disciplines, but also people that are experts on research infrastructure, people that are experts on data infrastructure being part of that, people that are really good at working with policy, for example, for talent, early career, gender balance, and all the rest. So it's extremely important for me to set up the organization and to attract talent into the organization so that we can give the right advice. But it's obviously not like we sit within closed walls in our organization to make those recommendations to the government. We also keep the door very open. We want to be transparent on how we think about it, how the different policies are being developed. And we take advice from the community, because it's the community, the research community that's doing the job. We're here to leverage what they're doing. So we need to make sure that all the policies that we develop and all the calls and all the mechanisms and the battery of things that we do, that it's fit for purpose, and only they can tell us that. So we try to link up the priorities and the wishes of the ministries and the long-term plan, and to translate into something that can be relevant and really efficient for how it's meeting the sort of how it can be done. You know, putting together something that's not relevant, that does not, or it cannot be worked by the research community. This is probably deviating a little bit from the question that you had, but it's the advice that we give. Sometimes it's very structured processes, like, for example, when there's a long-term plan and it's being revised, several times during the period that it's working. That's one process that we give advice to, but we also give, you can have different ministries contacting us to ask us to do small evaluations, or even just giving us advice at some small question that they're wondering here and now. They use us for that. So they depend on us to have that competence or enough competence to know who out there in the research community we should ask. So we coordinate in that sense.
Great, thanks very much. It's just behind the cluster of questions here. Linda's in ahead of you.
So,
yeah.
Mari, thank you for your talk. Linda Doyle, Trinity College. You said an interesting thing about culture, and you said culture was more important than structure. But for me, structure also reflects the culture and what you value. And there's some interesting ideas on the table about how we might think about structuring this agency. And I just wonder, you touched a bit with your portfolio boards. Could you talk us through a little bit what you did at the beginning to come up with the structure that you do have, and how you kind of traded things off? I know that's probably a long question, but I think the structure for us as well is something that will build the kind of trust that Jim and others mentioned. If you can see reflected in the structure, the kind of things that you're kind of looking for, if you know what I mean.
So thank you. Great question. I think that, structure doesn't necessarily take you all the way, but it can certainly hinder or it can promote the process that you want. So when the Norwegian Research Council was established 30 years ago, it was a true merger, but it was still just putting the different boxes next to each other in the structure. So they became, what was previously different organizations became divisions within one organization. And I think it's fair to say that the silos, is that?
It is right, yeah. You're right.
That they were still there, they were alive, and decades after, there were still differences in culture, still differences in ways of doing things, and we hadn't really taken that necessary leap towards actually working cross-sectoral or working truly interdisciplinary, which is probably also something that's developed in the understanding of the research community also during that time. But the previous chief executive, he said more or less, well, enough of this. I'm gonna stir it up a little bit. I hope he would be okay with me saying this. But so he reorganized everything into a quite intricate system, which was everything was sort of horizontal, and all the vertical lines really, or the organization more or less disappeared, and it really forced the organization into new ways of thinking. And I think that was very good, and that had a very important purpose in itself. And still coming into the organization, I saw that, okay, so this is probably too complex of a structure. So I've tried to take the best of that thinking and bringing it back to a more sort of straightforward way of organizing things, but still facilitating that work horizontally across in the organization, because you need that in order to be doing that very well in the calls and in the ways that we and the mechanisms to foster the interdisciplinarity of research itself. So it has to be mirrored, truly mirrored. And along with these processes, I think we've also been able to work with the culture. And it's also just it's so important that people know each other, understand the different responsibilities that people have and how we can work together. So in any organization, you have to work with that, and you have to work with the leadership. It's extremely important that the group of leaders on the executive level, that we are really one strong team together, and we're not representatives of different parts of the organization. Yeah, I think it's really getting there, and we're able to do something quite nice now.
Linda? Yeah, this gentleman here.
Yeah, Donnacha Kavanagh from UCD. So my question is about the balance, I suppose, between the state doing its own research and contracting research out into the market.
Yeah.
Like historically, I suppose Ireland, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, Ireland, the state did its own research.
Yeah.
And that's slowly changed. So there's only one agency really now within the state that does its own research, which is Teagasc, which is the Food Science Agency.
Okay. Yeah.
So pushing research out to the market has difficulties.
Yeah.
Like you get short-termism, you get transaction costs, you get kind of jump starting.
Yeah.
So how does Norway address that problem or that issue of trying to get some sustainability and endurance and organizational memory over the longer term, which are the difficulties with a marketized or a quasi-market model of funding research?
Yeah. Should I just? Okay, I'll try to remember the question, or should I just answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Try to answer questions.
In Norway, approximately 1/3 of the research funding goes through the research agency. 1/3. Every penny that is part of the competitive part of it, it's only us that does that. But 1/3 goes directly to the universities, and that would be mostly salaries for staff, and they have half the time for research. There would also be some infrastructure money in there, but we do most of the infrastructure funding. Apart from buildings and bigger, large-scale infrastructure development, that would be going straight from the parliament and ministries into different separate projects. And then there's the final third that goes straight to other research performing agencies like university hospitals, like also research institutes that have management of roles, like, for example, the Polar Institutes that oversees, they have lots of tasks that they perform for the government. And you have many agencies like that, like also the Public Health Institute, or so there would be research money going straight there as well. One third of the, and also some of it goes to the business sector. But we take care of all the sort of the competitive money.
Great, thanks, Mary. Kevin, any
Yes.
or Jim, any responses there? Any thoughts?
So I just think it's really important to pick up some of what was in there. That when we're talking about a public research ecosystem, competitive funding is incredibly important. And I think those neo-market or quasi-market, or at least competitive structures, right, that we use, but they're all dependent on core infrastructure, which is standing infrastructure inside the universities. And I think some of the problems we faced, and we're trying to conceptualize now, have been that with the best efforts in the world in your competitive funding agencies, if the core isn't taken care of, you run down your system. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to be incredibly careful about is not beefing up competitive research to the point where we actually are incapable of reproducing the system. Because don't forget, we don't fund at a full economic costing model, right? And therefore, every research-intensive universities, which are the Irish university, the IUA universities, all the research-intensive universities have to cross-subsidize research out of other income streams. And there were limits to that, because you can't threaten the quality of the teaching experience. So something's got to give. And what has given, as we all know, has been infrastructure. So the bill we're looking at gestures at this, but I think the system's going to have to do some very hard thinking about exactly how we hold that one-third model, because we're looking very carefully at one of those thirds, but we're not looking at the other two.
Yeah, and Maeve, I'm curious just on your thoughts from the industry perspective on what Jim is describing. And I suppose when you listen to that, is your reaction kind of where you see the big picture for research and the wider ecosystem?
Yeah, and I actually had a question for you on this, but yeah, so when it comes to infrastructure, like for example, we did a project recently with the Irish Centre for High-End Computing, and very successful. It was great. It was in the area of quantum chemistry. But say, for example, my understanding is, say, the HPC infrastructure in Ireland wouldn't be at the same level as a number of European countries. So you could have the best researchers in the world, or definitely on a par with those others in Europe. But if you just running the experiments is going to take 3 times longer in Ireland versus another country in Europe, say from my point of view, when I'm looking about who to collaborate with, we've got short timelines. We want to get stuff out to market quickly, so that is the danger. Exactly like you said, if the infrastructure isn't right, you can have the best researchers and you won't get an optimal outcome.
Absolutely. I'll bring in next, Mari. Jump in.
Just as an example of how we work with both the advisory and the funding role, because we have then the responsibility of overseeing and following and understanding the situation when it comes to research infrastructure in Norway. So we know where the weaknesses are. We know the totality of what is needed. Obviously, we know this from very close dialogue with the different parts of the community. There's a roadmap that is developed and constantly revised so that we know that we are in that totality, we're spending the money in a way that is giving the best total results. Obviously, we also want to keep it open so that things can be shared, but there are some things that you just need to have everywhere. But we really we really, I mean, you can spend all the money on infrastructure easily, but so we really we want to make sure that we spend that money in a right way. That also comes, it's a separate chapter impulse coming directly from the ministry, so it's taking care of the amount. It's been quite stable. So we advise on how it should be, and then we implement it. So it's really just making sure that everything links up and hangs together. Because if it starts being sort of who screams the loudest, and maybe like you get the shiny stuff and not the things that you need. So we found that way of working with the roadmap that we all sort of, everyone knows how it's developing. And so the first thing is to get into the roadmap, and then if you're in the roadmap, then you'll get the funding of it. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Mari. Kevin, you wanted to jump in?
With just one or two things. So I think I can see myself that certain national programs are very kind of, how would I say, helpful in terms of helping research scientists take the next step then into the Horizon Europe program. So there's a kind of a graduated pathway there. We like to see more of that, you know, that the national programs have a certain intentionality around internationalization and Horizon Europe. I'm also, let's say, just wearing my Horizon Europe hat, you know, I know that there's pain in the system around infrastructure, you know, and the need to replace not even big pieces of equipment, but even much smaller, more humdrum, you know, commoner garden stuff, and that's critical. And that's kind of table stakes kind of infrastructure needs that are there. And then I'm thinking about this stuff that maybe because of the talent we have in the system, that would give Ireland a competitive advantage then if we were using the next big shiny thing to do really new kind of pioneering stuff. So with my Horizon Europe hat, I would be concerned that we're creating constraints maybe within the system that's not to do with talent or capability, but the ability to access the right equipment to keep pace with what's happening, and how that then might affect us in terms of how we're perceived as project partners or a good member state in terms of where we are in the system. So definitely there's a need, there's a pain there, and probably an ongoing nostalgia for the PRTLI program.
Indeed,
I would say.
Indeed. Wise words, and resonates what Maeve is saying. It's Sinead who has the mic, or is it Jane? Both want it. Sinead, jump in first.
Fighting up there.
Sure, Jane will come in after me quickly. So Sinead Ryan from Trinity College Dublin. A quick question, which really relates to the discussion about infrastructure as well, but more broadly, we know how valuable it is to learn what's happening internationally. And you mentioned, I think, that you have an international advisory board. Could you say a little bit about the role and function of that board and the value that you get from it?
Yeah. Yes, yes, we have an international advisory board. We've been so lucky to have people with a very with the highest understanding of the international system, what is really state of the art within different fields and dimensions of being a research funder. To sit on this board, and what I really wanted to do is to challenge us on the way that we do things, like the blind spots that I was talking about. You know, every organization has a path dependency. It's so easy to just feel that, you know, when the business as usual is running well, everything's fine, right? But so I really want them to ask, you know, why don't you do that? Have you thought about that? Someone else is doing this. How would that look in your? So the strategic development of the organization to the benefit of the research community is that the strengthening the advisory role more than anything, but also our funding role. We have been working also with having their input to specific policies and things like that. But also for them to come and say to us, okay, so there's this this is a huge thing now internationally. What are you thinking about this? And we might be so, oh, we haven't started thinking about that yet. And so they can sort of spark important processes for us. So it's really, it's a setup to make sure that we ask the right questions.
Thanks, Mary.
So structurally important too.
Yeah.
Because the universities we're FDI, we're international traders. If we're not operating at the right level, we just can't get staff or students. Right. A national funding agency isn't international and bizarrely can be captured by local interests. If it doesn't have that international correlative, you can actually get this bizarre inversion of perspective.
Yeah, good point. Time for 2 more quick questions, just to give you that warning. Jane.
Thank you very much, Mari. I was inferring from what you were saying about your boards that they're all active researchers, and it would be good if you could clarify the boards. The other question I have is about money. Could you give us a sense of the scale of your third of the budget, how many millions, billions you're talking about, and the proportionality that goes to basic frontier research versus more oriented applied research. And then within that, to say for an area like the arts, humanities, social science, what proportion would be spent on an area like that in terms of the budget that's within your gift?
So which one? I didn't catch
So
it.
the first is the proportion of your budget that goes to basic research.
Yeah,
is it
that one I got? Yeah.
And then within that to arts, humanities, social
Arts,
science.
humanities, sorry, okay. Yes.
Sorry, and are your active researchers, are they the members of your board, all active researchers?
Yes. Yes, we have active researchers on the boards, not only in some of the boards, like for example, in the board that's responsible for the open arena or the disciplinary development, we would have more active researchers. That's the nature of that area, that field that they're overseeing. So that's very important. Whilst, for example, in other boards, for example, enabling technologies, we might have also more representatives from the business sector, but we would still have active researchers on every board. Yeah.
And then the proportionality.
Yeah,
roughly,
then there's
you can articulate
proportionality. So that 1/3 part that goes through us, that is 11 billion Norwegian kroner, and it's 1 to 13 now on the euro. So yeah, let's say just for simplicity, that is 1 billion euros. So that's the money that we're just doing in our heads, all going, how much more than that than ours is that? So the reaction we're getting from people's heads going. Right. So we used to, when it was much easier when it was 1 to 10. It was 1.1. Yeah. No. So that's the proportion, and
you keep tabs, I suppose, on the breakdown between different types of research and different disciplines, or is it more homogenous than that?
I mean, we do get funding from all the different ministries, right? So it's 15 ministries, and they would have so a lot of the money will have ties one way or another. But there would still be an opening, for example, if a ministry asks for this amount should go to, let's say, oceans, we could still make decisions on how much of that should be basic research, or how much of that should be applied, or how much of that should go to joint programs where you have industry and you have universities and so forth. But we also have the money that the groundbreaking board allocates, and that's not thematically predefined. It's completely open. It's only excellence and the best projects. And that also comes with directly from the government with that wrap-in. So it's 1.5 billion Norwegian kroner. You can start counting now.
Start it again.
Yeah. So that's the groundbreaking, which is without any thematic framing. And then, but it's fair to say that we have lots and lots of groundbreaking research throughout the portfolio, but then with quite broad thematic framing to it.
Okay, now I'm going to look at Leah, who's going to kill me if I keep going much longer. Last question, definitely.
Does that fall to me? Yeah, thanks. Claire McGee, Head of Education and Innovation Policy at IBEC. I also had a money question. I think you may have addressed it, but I was really struck by the statistic about 50% of your funding goes towards partnerships with industry. So in Ireland, we've transformed our economy over the last 40 years. You know, Maeve's organisation is testament to that as well, because of strategic investments across the higher education system and indeed the research system. We're now at a pinch point about being at the next wave of innovation and how we're and matching that then with a kind of spending stalemate. We're not making big decisions on how to make those investments. So I'm struck by that 50%, and I'm wondering, with the news agency that you established, did you have higher engagement with industry? Was that an improvement, that 50%? And how should we kind of continue to support that greater level of engagement between the academy and between enterprise? And did you get good feedback from your consultation with your enterprise partners?
Yeah.
Sorry, Leah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, and we do have extensive dialogue with the enterprise partners as well. I'm actually not sure how that proportion was before we became one, and that's many years ago. But I think that the understanding of the need for the business sector in Norway to be more research intensive, that's been growing over the last decades, and specifically right now, we have very clear goals from the government to increase that research intensity. Now, we can help find the right ways of doing that. And the business sector is not uniform. In Norway, we have some very, very large companies like Equinor or Hydro or Yara, or they're very big international companies. But 90, I think it's even up to 95% of the businesses would be as SMEs. And the structure is quite rapidly changing. We're seeing more, we're seeing diversification for sure, new renewable energy, new fields within that realm that's coming up and coming. We have battery industry coming up, wind, of course, but we also have the health sector, which is growing quite rapidly. Bioengineering, you know, you have different fields, and you have fields that maybe are innately sort of more research intensive, where they have to be more research intensive. You know that a very big industry in Norway is aquaculture. For some reason, aquaculture has been quite low research intensity, apart from the things that go to do with veterinary medicine and all of that. But so we need to get that intensity up. We are working with different mechanisms, and it can be everything from tax refund schemes, which comes on top of the 11 billion, by the way, that's outside of that. Or it can be like simple things like we have a mechanism which is borrow a researcher, where very small firms that can borrow a researcher for 3 months. And we've had some excellent results coming from that, where during that half a year or 3 months, they can develop something very new that's a breakthrough for that business, or a new patent or whatever. But so we have that, but we also have like 10-year excellence programs where you get 150 million kroner to put together a big consortia that can work together with very sort of wide frames for 10 years. Fantastic. So we have lots of different ways of doing it. And I think it's just one very important thing is that you need to make sure that all the different partners in these consortia can work on their own terms, with their own principles and integrity and research ethics. Yeah.
Right, it's been wonderful, and I think we all agree we could spend the whole day here discussing further. Unfortunately, we can't, and we do have to finish. I'd like to first of all thank Mari particularly. It's been fantastic. We've learned huge amounts. Thank you so much. And to thank our wonderful panel, Kevin, Maeve and Jim. Appreciate your contributions. It's been really wonderful having you here with us. And to our audience, both online and with us in person. And just to say, this is being recorded and will be available afterwards. And I just think, look, again, thank you all for really interesting and stimulating, very valuable discussion and debate. And thank you all. Take care.